this is Sweetly, and I want to first thank you all for the encouragement and support on my previous videos. I've had a lot of fun making them, and as I've been enjoying Blade so far, this time I wanted to try making an in-depth character guide for Blade. After playing and testing Blade the past week, I feel like Blade is a very strong DPS when paired with Bronya, and I was even able to 0-turn MOC10 with my E0 S1 Blade. In this video, I will be going over Blade skills, trace priorities, optimal relic setups, Lightcone choices, Eidolons, and team compositions. In addition, I will also go over the Bronya Blade Rotation, the speed tuning, and end with some useful tips. I tried to cover a lot of the common questions I've heard on stream, so hopefully this helps some of you. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you have any questions or spot any mistakes. We will start by going over Blade skills. Blade skill does 3 things. It consumes 30% of his max HP and he enters the hellscape state for 3 turns, rendering him unable to use the skill again until the state ends. If Blade has less than 30% HP when he casts this, the skill will leave him at 1 HP, so he will always be able to cast his skill. While in the hellscape state, Blade's basic attacks are converted to enhanced basic attacks, and he increases his damage dealt on all of his attacks. The skill by itself does not do any damage and does not regenerate any energy, so you always want to use his skill before his ultimate if you start the turn with both available. After using Blade's skill, it does not end his turn, and Blade can immediately use his first enhanced basic attack afterwards. However, it does count as ending the turn for buff purposes, and during this time, turn-based damage buffs that are placed on him do not decrease in turn count until after his next turn. This includes his own hellscape buff, and makes it so that even though the hellscape state is only supposed to last for 3 turns, the 3 turns only start counting down after his next turn, effectively allowing Blade to perform 4 enhanced basic attacks for every skill cast. This is important to remember because not only does it mean he is very skill point efficient, only using 1 skill point every 4 turns, you can actually apply the same logic to extend ally buffs on Blade. For example, waiting to use Bronya or teaming ultimate until after Blade uses his skill will give him the buff for the current turn as well as the next 2 turns, which means that these normal 2-turn buffs will actually buff 3 of Blade's turns this way. However, if you cast Bronya or teaming ulti at any other time, such as right before he uses his skill, only 2 of his turns will be buffed. This is a pretty neat trick and can make a big difference since it's a 50% increase in these ulti buff uptime for Blade. Enhanced basic attack. Blade's enhanced basic attack is a blast type attack that deals full damage and 2 units of break to the primary target and 40% damage and 1 unit of break to the adjacent targets. The attack consumes 10% of Blade's max HP, and just like his skill, will leave him at 1 HP if he does not have enough. The important thing to remember here is that the HP loss takes place before the attack, so Blade will be able to immediately benefit from any buffs that trigger on HP loss, such as the 4-piece set effect for Longevous Disciple and his signature Lightcone. On the other hand, however, since the attack is 2 hits, conditional damage triggers will be checked before each hit. So for instance, if the first hit brings the enemy below Blade's HP, then the Secret Veil extra damage will not apply to Blade's second hit. Blade regens 30 energy on each enhanced basic attack, which gives him an almost perfect 4-turn rotation with 4 enhanced basic attacks plus 1 follow-up attack from the talent trigger. Ultimate. Blade's ultimate has 2 effects. First, it sets his HP to 50%, so depending on Blade's current HP, it will either heal him or consume his HP. If Blade loses HP this way, it will proc any HP loss related buffs, add a stack towards his talent follow-up attack, and record the HP loss towards the extra damage for his ultimate. After setting his HP to 50%, Blade will unleash a blast type attack that deals full damage and 2 units of break to the primary target and 40% damage and 2 units of break to adjacent targets. The ultimate deals the same damage as an enhanced basic attack, with the potential to deal 2x with the extra damage portion that scales based on how much life Blade has lost since his last ultimate. This is capped at 90% of Blade's max HP, and generally due to his natural life loss on Blade's own attacks, he does not have very much trouble maxing out on the damage bonus, even without getting hit. Depending on your survivability, you can either use the ultimate aggressively to proc HP loss effects and deal more damage, or defensively to heal Blade when his HP gets too low. Talent. Blade's talent also has 2 effects. It records a charge stack for each instance of life loss Blade sustains, including any that he triggers himself, and once it reaches 5 stacks, Blade will consume all charges and launch an AoE follow-up attack that deals full damage and 1 unit of break to every enemy on the field. After the attack, Blade will heal 25% of his max HP. Keep in mind that multi-hit attacks from the same enemy will only contribute 1 stack, but unique DOTs on Blade will add 1 stack each. If Blade is CC'd when the stacks reach 5, he will launch the attack once he is un-CC'd, and if he reaches 5 stacks after defeating a wave, he will immediately launch the follow-up attack at the start of the next wave. The follow-up attack deals 10% more damage than his enhanced basic attack on a single target, but since it's AoE, it will do considerably more damage with more enemies. Proccing the talent often is key to keeping Blade healthy while also increasing his overall damage. You ideally want to trigger the attack when he has the most buffs active, for instance, after Bronya uses her skill on him. As all of Blade's attacks can cause him to lose HP, he can gain up to 3 stacks in 1 turn from a skill, ultimate, and enhanced basic attack rotation. And with Bronya, Blade can have 2 turns back to back, pretty much guaranteeing a talent proc. Trace priorities. In terms of traces, since Blade's enhanced basic attack, ultimate, and talent follow-up attack all contribute to his damage, I recommend leveling up all of Blade's main traces evenly, with a small priority on his basic attack. All of Blade's minor traces are also worth unlocking, with the exception of this effect resist trace. Currently, level 90 enemies have 32% effect hit rate, which negates up to 24.2 effect resistance. So if you want to save on some resources, you don't need to unlock this until you can reach 24% or more effect resistance. In terms of relics, Blade's kit synergizes really well with Longevous Disciple, the new 4-piece relic set at 1.2, and it is quite strong and the most versatile set for Blade. However, an interesting finding I wanted to mention is that if you're using Silver Wolf or Paula with Blade versus Quantum weak enemies, the 4-piece Quantum set actually outperforms the 4-piece Longevous set by about 3% with the same substats, due to the OP defense downstacking. So 4-piece Quantum is also an option if you don't want to farm the new Relic Cavern and you happen to have decent pieces lying around. Versus non-Quantum weak enemies, it will be equivalent to the 2-piece Longevous set plus the 2-piece Eagle of Twilight line. For the main stats, Blade wants crit rate or crit damage body piece depending on which one he is lacking. Generally, you should target at least 70% crit rate. For the boots, Blade can go on either HP or speed boots, with speed boots being preferred over HP boots, unless you have an E2 Bronya or a Bronya with very high speed. I will go over specific speeds in the speed tuning section later. For the 2-piece planar ornaments, Blade can either use Inert Salsato or Rudolin Arena, with Arena giving a little more damage with the same substats. Inert Salsato will be slightly stronger for E1 Blade. However, unless you already have decent pieces lying around, I would not recommend farming SU6 just for Blade, as the Rudolin Arena set is paired with the Broken Keel set in SU7, which is a usable set for supports. The crit damage can stack. This makes farming SU7 a bit more efficient unless you also need Inert Salsato for other characters. When checking to see if your Blade will meet the 70% crit rate condition for Rudolin Arena, don't forget to add in the extra 16% crit rate from the 4-piece Longevous set if you're using that for Blade, since Blade generally has 100% uptime on the buff. For the main stats on your ornaments, Blade generally wants to be on a wind damage sphere. An HP sphere will be a bit worse in almost all cases unless you have an insane HP percent sphere and you're using a bonus damage heavy team, e.g. Bronya with her signature Lightcone. For the rope, Blade really wants HP percent. Energy regen is not that important for Blade since his ultimate does not dominate his damage output and he already has a nice 4-turn ult rotation. Attack percent is also not very beneficial for Blade due to his very low attack percent scaling. In terms of relic substats, you really want to prioritize crit damage, crit rate, speed, and HP percent. Attack percent is not useless, but one attack percent roll is worth about 1/6 of an HP percent roll. Speed is usually good and some substats are preferred, but if you're running the Blade Bronya Hybrid Carry team, you'll generally want to speed tune your team and you might or might not want extra speed. I will explain the details in the speed tuning section later. In terms of Lightcones, Blade's signature Lightcone outperforms everything else by a wide margin, and I definitely recommend pulling for it. In the event that you don't get his Lightcone, you'll hopefully have gotten at least a few copies of a Secret Vow, his second best Lightcone. However, keep in mind that even when compared with an S5 Secret Val, Blade's signature Lightcone will give Blade quite a bit more damage. The Secret Val conditional damage buff also has questionable uptime, especially if you're using Blade with Luocha, since Blade will generally be at fairly high HP. Here are the percentage estimates for each Lightcone, proportional to the S5 of the 3-star Lightcone of mutual demise. Apart from the Lightcones featured in this chart, I do not recommend any other Lightcones for Blade, as most of you should have an S5 mutual demise, and the other destruction Lightcones all mainly give attack percent, which Blade scales very poorly on. I also do not recommend trading for the Herta Shop destruction Lightcone unless you already own an S5, since it's only a little bit stronger than the S5 mutual demise if you can proc the weakness break bonus damage effect. In terms of Blade's Eidolons, E1 to E5 are all purely stat and damage increases, with the E6 being the transformative Eidolon that really elevates Blade's damage potential and fun. If you have Blade's E1, you can prioritize Inert Salsato for your 2-piece planar ornament due to the higher damage share on his ultimate, but keep in mind at E1, it'll only be slightly better versus Eidolon Arena. The E2's extra 15% crit rate is generally always active unless your talent follow-up attack happens to proc on the exact turn your housekeep runs out. If you have E2, you'll definitely want to use a crit damage body piece. Blade's E4 slightly improves Blade's survivability on top of the damage increase. At 2 stacks, Blade gains roughly an additional 1000 HP. One trick to get 1 stack early is to enter combat with Blade's technique, which consumes 20% of his max HP, so when Blade uses his skill and consume another 30%, he will immediately gain a stack. Blade's E6 is the most interesting Eidolon and will bring a 20 to 30% additional increase in damage, while greatly improving Blade's survivability. The 50% additional HP scaling on the passive increases the follow-up damage by about 40%, and reducing the charge stacks from 5 to 4 not only makes it easier to trigger, you can also line it up more consistently with Bronya buffs for more damage overall. More passive triggers also give Blade more energy, increases his survivability, and most importantly, lets you see his cool follow-up animation more often. At E6, you should definitely use 2-piece Inert Salsato on Blade, as it will be a lot better than Eidolon Arena due to the higher damage share on not only your ultimate, but your follow-up attack. Team compositions. Blade's best team by far is his Hyper Carry comp with Bronya. If you really want to play Blade Hyper Carry without Bronya, you can bring Asta or even Teaming, but as mentioned in my last video, he will do a lot less damage here. Silverwolf will also be weaker on the team without Bronya due to the increase in types. If you are running Teaming, make sure to use the ulti buff extension trick on Blade and use her ultimate after Blade uses his skill, so Blade gets 3 turns of buffs instead of 2. If you are running Asta, you don't have to specifically wait until after Blade uses his skill to cast her ultimate, since speed buffs already get a natural extension on characters as long as you cast them on their turn. You probably also want to max Asta's ultimate trace and have her on a 3-turn rotation so Asta can always keep the speed buff on Blade. Without Bronya, you can also play dual carry Blade with Asta buffing both DPS. Sealy can be any other not so SP hungry DPS like Su Shang, or you can slot in another DPS you have built. Asta can be swapped for Recon or Pella, but the lack of a speed buffer will drastically decrease Blade's damage. Now for the fun part. Bronya Blade Speed Tuning. If you're running Blade with Bronya, it is highly recommended to speed tune the two as it can make a huge difference. Speed tuning refers to getting your characters to a specific speed for more optimal rotations and higher damage overall. It can sound complicated, especially when multiple characters are involved. The concepts are actually quite simple, and I will try to break it down so it's easier to understand. To start off, most Bronyas on the Blade team will generally want to be on one of 2 rotations. Either Bronya only uses her skill, aka the Bronya EE Rotation, or Bronya alternates between basic attack and skill, aka the Bronya AE Rotation. As an example to show the importance of speed tuning, if you decide to go with the Bronya EE Rotation and go into combat with Bronya and Blade at their base speeds, Bronya will go first because she is faster and immediately action forward Blade with her skill. However, Blade benefits very little here since he was about to take a turn anyway, and this rotation leads to Blade only taking 2 turns by action value 204. Now, if you give Blade an extra 3 speed, such that Blade is now faster than Bronya, he will now go first. And when Bronya takes her turn right after him, Bronya's skill will give him another turn right away, and this results in Blade getting twice as many turns in the same time frame. In this case, the 3 additional speed on Blade is almost equivalent to an 100% damage increase. However, if you give Blade an additional 20 speed while keeping Bronya at her base speed, you will discover that Blade does not gain any extra turns, because even though Blade is a lot faster, Bronya will always reset Blade's position with her 100% action forward skill, negating any progress he made towards his next turn with his extra speed. Therefore, while sometimes 3 speed can make a big difference, an extra 20 speed might not make very much difference at all. So it's important to take into account all your character speeds and speed tune appropriately. More speed is not always better. For those with E0 and E1 Bronyas, on the Bronya EE Rotation, Bronya should be just slower than Blade, so Bronya can go right after Blade takes his turn, effectively doubling his speed. If your Blade is quite a bit faster than Bronya in this setup, you should increase Bronya's speed to benefit the most. On the Bronya AE Rotation, Bronya should be much faster than Blade, so that after she basic attacks and action forwards herself, she will take her second turn right after Blade takes his first turn. In terms of damage, the Bronya EE Rotation will generally deal more damage compared to the Bronya AE Rotation, simply due to Bronya giving Blade more turns in the same time frame. However, the optimal Bronya EE Rotation has much higher speed requirements and is not always recommended unless you want to heavily invest into your Blade. The damage increase will not be that significant either unless you meet specific thresholds and will be quite a bit more skill point intensive overall. I will go over some optimal speed thresholds for both rotations, and you can decide which one is best depending on your personal preferences, relics, and skill point needs. Keep in mind that most of these thresholds will target cycle breakpoints, which only applies to cycle-limited content like Forgotten Hall, Memory of Chaos, and occasionally some events. If you're not tackling MOC or have not even started relic farming yet, you do not need to focus on the exact numbers. Instead, just try to remember who should be faster than who in each rotation and by roughly how much. Down the line, if you're interested in optimizing your Blade plus Bronya rotation, you can come back and check out the thresholds you can build towards. In the optimal Bronya EE rotation, Bronya should be just a little bit slower than Blade. 134 speed is the most common threshold you will see, as it allows your characters to go twice on the first cycle of every MOC wave, and also gives you an extra turn every 3 cycles. In my 0-turn MOC 10 clear, I speed-tuned my Blade and Bronya to be 134. One interesting thing I want to point out here is that even though 134 is the number you will typically hear being thrown around, the actual number is 133.33 repeating, and sometimes even when your character only has 133 speed as displayed on the stat screen, they will be able to go twice during the first cycle as seen here. This is because the speed rolls on your relics are not always whole numbers, and even though the game does not display any decimals, the actual values are stored and used in all the calculations. So even though sometimes your characters might only have 133 speed on the stat page, they might actually have 133.6 and could meet the speed requirements for going twice on the first MOC cycle. Another interesting finding I came across is that if your characters have the exact same speed, the one positioned on the left will always go first. Something else worth mentioning is that percentage speed buffs give speed based on each character's base speed. So if Bronya procs the 4-piece hacker space set effect, she will gain a little bit more speed versus Blade due to her higher base speed. Keep this in mind when speed tuning Bronya to be right behind Blade for the Bronya EE rotation, as you don't want Bronya to randomly become faster than Blade. 134 speed is definitely not easy to reach by any means and will almost require speed boots on both Blade and Bronya plus additional substats. If you can't hit 134, any other combination where Bronya is at least 120 speed, which requires Blade to be 121 speed plus, also works. The 120 speed is highly recommended on Bronya so she can proc the 2-piece Von Whack set effect. I'll go into a little more detail on why Bronya prefers to run 2-piece Von Whack in the tip section after. If you can't meet these requirements, or if you already have great relics with double crit but no speed, I recommend going for a Bronya AE rotation, which while on paper appears to deal less damage compared to the Bronya EE rotation, it's much easier to build for, and also gives the team more skill points, which could be quite useful in a lot of situations. Blade speed in this rotation is irrelevant to the total number of turns you will take, so it's a really good setup if you don't have any speed rolls on your relics. The idea here is that Bronya utilizes her talent to action forward herself after using a basic attack, which generates more skill points while still speeding up Blade by quite a bit. The Bronya AE Rotation is very useful in a lot of other hyper carry teams as well, for instance with Bronya plus Jingyuan, so I definitely recommend maxing her talent for the 30% action forward at level 10. With a Blade at 97 speed, he pairs best with a Bronya that is as close to 164 speed as possible. The 164 is Bronya's max speed, calculated from Blade speed. Your Bronya does not want to exceed her max speed since she will go twice before Blade's first turn, which would be bad. However, 164 is a very high number, so I wouldn't generally worry about it. The most important thing to remember here is that unless your Bronya can go above 164 speed, extra speed on Blade in the Bronya AE rotation does not benefit Blade very much, and you would much rather just convert them to HP percent or crit and crit damage rolls. If you have an E2 Bronya, consider yourself very lucky, and you should probably always be on the Bronya EE rotation with one key difference. Your Bronya will want to be faster than Blade. Bronya's E2 has the unique ability to increase Blade speed by 30% for one turn after he takes action, which is equivalent to a 29.1 speed increase. It makes it so your Blade only needs 105 speed to turn into a 134 speed Blade after Bronya uses her skill on him. This is a huge damage boost for Blade since he can bring HP percent boots while also meeting the 134 speed threshold that I mentioned earlier for the Bronya EE rotations. You do have the choice of using Blade with speed boots as well if you have a good one already, but your Bronya would need extra speed to really benefit, so I generally recommend HP percent boots for this setup. A few final tips I want to mention about the Bronya Blade hybrid carry team. The first is that, regardless of which Bronya rotation you're using, Blade will have one non-buff turn right before Bronya uses her skill, followed by a Bronya buffed turn. As mentioned in my previous video, Bronya's buff is very strong on Blade, especially if you're using her signature Lightcone or past and future. Therefore, you should always save Blade's ultimate for Bronya buff turn or use it immediately at the end of a Bronya buff turn if it comes up after your enhanced attack. Also remember, if possible, to always use Bronya's ultimate after Blade uses his skill for the ultimate extension trick. The second tip is that for longer battles on either rotation, you ideally want to bring 2-piece Von Whack on Bronya so you can immediately use her skill at the start of battle to action forward Blade and synchronize Blade's skill and ultimate with his Bronya buff turns. This is important not just in terms of increasing Blade's damage on his ultimate, but also because this will allow him to gain 2 to 3 stacks of charge towards his talent during a Bronya buffed turn, which greatly improves Blade's chances of proccing his AoE follow-up attack with the maximum buffs active. Keep in mind, Bronya will need at least 120 speed to activate the Von Whack effect. If you've gotten to this part, thank you for watching and supporting my YouTube channel. Previously, I've only released short tips and guides, and in-depth character guides like this one have always seemed very daunting for me. And if you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you can like, subscribe, and comment. And comment, yes. I like comments. Thank you, everyone.